We apologize for interrupting your doom scrolling. Now, for some positive leftist news.
PLN is a member of MeansTV, a worker-owned socialist streaming platform. Stay tuned until the end of the episode for a special 20% discount offer from MeansTV, and find the discount link and code in the description box below. A jury in Birmingham, UK refused to convict 4 pro-Palestine activists, Ian Evans, Hannah Yoon Stevens, B. Sherman, and Hisham Al-Khamezi, who were charged with criminal damage for breaking into a Wolverhampton arms factory owned by Moog, a US-based aerospace firm, in August of 2024. The group admitted to forcing entry and shutting down the facility, but argued their actions were lawful because they were trying to prevent the shipment of aircraft parts to Israel to be used in the ongoing genocide in Gaza. The jury deliberated for over 17 hours before being discharged without a conviction. During the trial, prosecutors insisted the case was solely about property damage, while the defense evidenced the activists' clear motive to save lives. Evans, a former aerospace worker, testified that staying on the roof longer meant more lives being spared. After the hung jury, a minute of silence was held outside the courthouse for Gaza victims, and the 4 were granted bail until July 3rd, when the Crown Prosecution Service will decide whether to seek a retrial. Workers across Britain's land trade sector have launched a boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign in solidarity with the Palestinian liberation struggle. Led by the grassroots union Solidarity Across Land Trades, or SALT, the campaign seeks to sever economic ties between Britain's land-based industries and companies linked to Israel's occupation and settler colonial project. The union has identified firms involved in agrochemicals, irrigation systems, agricultural machinery, and other sectors that profit from or maintain links to the Israeli state. As a trade union of workers in the land trades, we're firmly anti-capitalist, SALT said at the campaign's launch. We're fighting for an anti-capitalist future for our industry that's in the hands of the workers. According to SALT organizer Rohan Rice, the campaign grew out of discussions on how to escalate solidarity with Palestine beyond symbolic support, drawing inspiration from industrial action organized by militant trade unions in Italy and from Britain's pro-Palestine prisoner movement. For SALT members, the struggle for Palestine is inseparable from the struggle over land itself. The union has repeatedly condemned the destruction of agricultural livelihoods in Gaza and attacks on Palestinian farmland in the occupied West Bank, viewing them as part of a broader colonial project of dispossession. Rice argued that Palestine stands at the center of contemporary anti-colonial politics. Land is at the heart of all anti-colonial struggle, he said. Nowhere is the land question more nakedly obvious than in Palestine. SALT hopes the campaign will help lay the foundations for broader worker-led action across Britain, expanding solidarity with Palestine from consumer boycotts to organized resistance. By targeting companies complicit in Israeli apartheid and encouraging workers to withdraw their labor from imperialist supply chains, the union aims to actualize solidarity. For SALT, Palestinian liberation is not an isolated cause but part of a global struggle against colonialism, imperialism, and capitalist exploitation, a struggle that can only be won through organized, working-class power. Tens of thousands filled the streets of Boston on June 6th for the city's 56th annual Pride March, held under the banner Pride as Protest. The demonstration celebrated LGBTQ+ resistance while channeling growing anger against the Trump administration's attacks on queer and trans people, immigrants, and the working class. Trade unionists, socialists, anti-war activists, and community organizations marched side by side, including healthcare workers with 1199 SEIU, educators from the Massachusetts Teachers Organization, hospitality workers with Unite Here Local 26, electrical workers, stagehands, and government employees. They were joined by LGBTQ+ youth organizations, housing justice campaigns, and AIDS advocacy groups. One of the most energetic contingents was the pro-Palestine bloc, organized by Boston Democratic Socialists of America and joined by the Boston Coalition for Palestine, Jewish Voice for Peace, the Boston South Asian Coalition, and Workers' World Party. Led by a sound truck and militant chants, marches were met with enthusiastic support from crowds lining the 2-mile route from Copley Square to Boston Common. Spectators waved Palestinian flags, joined chants of Free, Free Palestine, and embraced calls to end Massachusetts support for U.S.-Israeli war crimes in Palestine, Lebanon, and Iran. Signs throughout the march declared "No pride in genocide," and from Stonewall to Palestine, pride means fight back. The demonstration underscored the growing convergence of struggles for queer liberation, Palestinian freedom, immigrant rights, reproductive rights, and economic justice. Chants demanding an end to ICE raids, defending trans rights, and calling for rent control echoed throughout the city, reflecting a movement increasingly linking pride to broader struggles against war, oppression, and exploitation. The Mi'kmaq Nation has regained ownership of nearly 3,400 acres of land near Bridgewater, Maine, a transfer that will more than double the nation's current land holdings. The land was returned through a partnership involving the Conservation Fund, tribal organizations, and conservation groups that raised about $1.9 million to facilitate the return. Leaders say the land will provide space for traditional livelihoods, teaching cultural practices to younger generations, and preserving access to areas that have increasingly been lost to development or private ownership. The area contains forests, wetlands, and more than 3 miles of trout-bearing stream. The land return is part of a broader effort in Maine called the Tributary Land Returns, a series of projects aimed at restoring Indigenous stewardship over historically significant lands. This return is part of a larger resurgence for the nation, which has recently gained a legislative representative seat, expanded housing initiatives, and is preparing to open a tribal court. Land back everywhere. Mass protests continue to sweep Bolivia as peasant organizations, trade unions, and social movements vow to remain in a state of permanent mobilization until right-wing President Rodrigo Paz resigns. The uprising began in response to government plans that protesters say would open the door to the seizure of peasant lands to settle debts. As resistance grew, workers organized through the Bolivian Workers' Center joined the mobilizations, transforming a rural struggle into a broader challenge to Paz's government. Facing roadblocks, demonstrations, and mass unrest, the administration initially relied on repression before reshuffling ministers in an attempt to ease tensions. With protests continuing unabated, Paz has now turned back to coercive measures, signing a new state of emergency law that grants the presidency sweeping powers and expands the role of police and military forces in domestic conflicts. Opponents have condemned the legislation as a threat to democratic rights and civil liberties. Former President Evo Morales warned that the law weakens oversight of state power and broadens military intervention in internal affairs, while social movements accuse the government of escalating political persecution. At the same time, Paz has sought to discredit the protest by linking militant sectors of the movement to drug trafficking, branding them narco-terrorists. Protesters and labor organizers reject the accusation, arguing that it follows a familiar pattern used by Latin America's right-wing governments to criminalize popular resistance. Despite the crackdown, the mobilizations show little sign of retreat. Social movements, peasant organizations, and trade unions continue to demand Paz's resignation, framing their struggle as a defense of land, democracy, and popular sovereignty against the interests of domestic elites and international capital. In a major victory for healthcare workers, 1,600 registered nurses across 5 Orange County hospitals have voted overwhelmingly to join the California Nurses Association, with 91% backing union representation. The vote comes after years of chronic understaffing, broken equipment, and deteriorating working conditions that undermined both patient care and worker well-being. Rather than accept management's attacks on staffing and workplace standards, nurses organize collectively to fight back. The victory unites nurses across 5 hospitals under one organization, strengthening their ability to fight for safe staffing levels, better working conditions, and quality patient care. At a time when healthcare corporations continue to prioritize profits over patients, the vote stands as a reminder that workers' strongest weapon remains organization. Brazil's Chamber of Deputies has approved a constitutional amendment that would end the country's 6x1 work schedule, replacing it with a 5-day work week and 2 days of paid rest. The measure passed with overwhelming support. The reform marks a major shift in the struggle over working conditions, reducing the maximum weekly work schedule from 44 hours to 40 hours, while guaranteeing that workers' salaries cannot be reduced as a result. The transition will take place gradually. 2 months after the amendment takes effect, workers covered by Brazil's labor laws would gain 2 paid days off per week. The full 40-hour work week will be implemented 14 months later. For millions of Brazilian workers, the reform represents a long fight for more humane working conditions in a system where the 6x1 schedule has forced many employees to work 6 days a week with little time for rest, family, or community life. The amendment still requires approval from the Senate, but the vote represents a significant victory for labor movements demanding a shorter work week without loss of pay. Mozambique has taken a major step toward greater control over its natural resources, introducing new mining laws aimed at ending the country's long-standing role as an exporter of raw materials and ensuring mineral wealth benefits national development. Signed into law by President Daniel Chapo on June 3rd, the reforms grant the national mining company a free 15% stake across the mining value chain, with the possibility of expanding state ownership further. The legislation also requires domestic processing of minerals and bans the export of raw or semi-processed resources unless approved by the government. The anti-neocolonial move seeks to keep more value inside Mozambique by forcing companies to invest in local industry, jobs, and economic development, rather than simply extracting resources and shipping profits abroad. Mining companies receiving temporary export approval must present plans for future local processing. Mozambique is one of the world's largest producers of graphite, a critical mineral for electric vehicle batteries, and also holds significant rare earth deposits. Under the new rules, 10% of mining revenues will be directed into a local development fund to support communities affected by extraction. The reforms come amid a broader wave of resource nationalism across Africa, where governments are challenging foreign corporate control over mineral wealth. Countries such as Burkina Faso, Mali, and Zimbabwe have moved to increase state ownership, restrict raw mineral exports, and demand greater local benefits from mining, which has traditionally operated in a nakedly neocolonial fashion. More than 12,000 people took to the streets of Brussels on June 14th for the Welfare Not Warfare protest, bringing together over 800 civil society organizations, trade unions, and social movements to oppose the European Union and NATO's growing rearmament agenda. The demonstration challenged the idea that security could be achieved through billions of euros in military spending while social programs face cuts. Organizers argued that Europe's push toward militarization is diverting resources away from healthcare, housing, education, and climate action. Ongoing wars, occupation, genocide, and military violence are shaping lives around the world, from Palestine, Iran, and Lebanon to Yemen, Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, said Juliette Madison of the People's Health Movement Europe, linking the continent's rearmament drive to broader systems of militarization and global conflict. Protesters warned that the EU's planned defense expansion could redirect tens of billions of euros toward weapons industries. Campaigners highlighted that the cost of a single fighter jet could instead fund healthcare workers, medical equipment, and social services. We refuse to accept that young people are cannon fodder and the elderly are budgetary line items, said Peter Mertens, General Secretary of the Workers' Party of Belgium. We refuse a future that consists of more weapons and more war, paid for by longer working hours, less healthcare, and higher bills. The protest comes as European governments increase military spending targets and consider expanded military service programs. Activists argue that the growing arms buildup risks creating a permanent war economy while placing the costs on working people through austerity and increased public debt. For organizers, the choice is clear. Resources spent on weapons cannot simultaneously be spent on improving people's lives. Rearmament is sold to us as security, but the only thing it really secures are the profits of the weapon industries, said Katerina Anastasio of Stop Rearm Europe. The movement is calling for investment in social needs, diplomacy, disarmament, and international solidarity instead of a new arms race, arguing that true security comes from healthcare, housing, dignity, and peace, rather than militarization. Thousands of people gathered in Belfast to condemn racist violence and anti-immigrant attacks. The anti-racism demonstration followed several nights of unrest after stabbing led to the arrest of a 30-year-old man from Sudan on attempted murder charges. In the aftermath, groups of masked rioters targeted homes they believed belonged to immigrants, setting buildings and vehicles on fire. More than 24 people were left homeless. The Belfast rally became a show of resistance against racism and xenophobia, with demonstrators carrying signs reading, "Your racism is not patriotism," and "Protect people, not prejudice." Activist Elaine Crory told the crowd outside Belfast City Hall, All it takes is for one person who's not white and local to commit a crime, and that fire of racism is rekindled. For attendees, the demonstration represented a rejection of the idea that racist violence reflects the views of the wider community. Similar anti-racist mobilizations took place elsewhere in the UK, including Glasgow, where thousands rallied against far-right organizing after minorities were targeted and a mosque was placed under lockdown during unrest. The protests reflect a growing movement pushing back against attempts to divide communities through racism and fear, with demonstrators demanding solidarity, safety, and an end to attacks on migrants and minorities. Hundreds of women, activists, and community members mobilized across Kenya on June 1st to demand urgent action against femicide, gender-based violence, and the growing crisis of missing children. Activists say the scale of the crisis represents a failure by state institutions to protect vulnerable communities and deliver justice. Women's movements are demanding that the government recognize femicide and violence against women as a national crisis, calling for immediate action to confront what they describe as a culture of impunity. Perpetua Kariuki of the Kaoli Social Justice Center criticized the government's response, arguing that communities are being left without protection or justice. A government that cannot protect women from femicide, cannot safeguard children from predators, and cannot account for missing children is failing in one of its most fundamental obligations, the protection of life and human dignity, she said. Protesters are calling for stronger child protection systems, survivor-centered justice, accountability for perpetrators regardless of status or influence, and full implementation of existing protections for victims. The demonstrations build on a growing wave of resistance against gender-based violence in Kenya. From nationwide anti-femicide protests in 2024 to the latest mobilizations, women-led movements continue to demand a future where violence is no longer ignored and where every woman and child is protected. A decade-long partnership between Oakland Zoo, the Blackfeet Nation, and Indigenous-led conservation efforts has reached a major milestone with the birth of the 50th bison calf in the restoration program. The newborn calves represent more than the recovery of a species once pushed toward extinction. They symbolize the restoration of a relationship between Indigenous communities, land, and wildlife. The program, launched in 2016, aims to return descendants of the herd to the Blackfeet territory in Montana, helping restore free-ranging bison populations connected to their historic landscapes. Earlier this year, 5 bison were returned to Montana, where they joined the Blackfeet herd in Browning. The restoration effort focuses on rebuilding genetic diversity in American bison populations, which were devastated during colonial expansion when millions of animals were slaughtered to make way for livestock production and to devastate Indigenous nations. Christina Mormaruni, Executive Director of Indigenous Led, said, "Together we are restoring threads that were once severed between people and place, culture and identity, memory and future." The milestone highlights a broader vision of conservation led through Indigenous partnership, where protecting ecosystems also means honoring the people, histories, and relationships that have long shaped and continue to shape the land. Thousands of people have taken to the streets of Tirana in a growing movement against luxury tourism developments they say threaten Albania's natural heritage, public land, and the interests of local communities. The protests, which began in late May, were sparked by construction activity in the Narta Wildlife Reserve and expanded after plans emerged for a high-end resort project on Sazan Island, a former military site promoted by Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. Demonstrators are demanding the cancellation of the projects and the resignation of Prime Minister Edi Rama. The Sazan development has become a symbol of wider anger over the privatization of Albania's coastline, with critics arguing that public land and protected areas are being handed over to wealthy investors at the expense of communities and ecosystems. Critics argue that investment policies have weakened protections for farmers, rural communities, and the environment, while expanding opportunities for oligarchs to profit from land and tourism. Changes to protected area laws have opened the door for luxury developments in areas previously shielded from construction. The protests represent a wider struggle over who controls Albania's future: local communities and the public, or wealthy investors seeking exclusive tourist enclaves. Enrico Paciuli, an activist and member of the progressive party Levizja Bashka, said, "We are a people fed up who never dared to think that this might happen. A fully grown generation will come out of it, educated on taking action and organizing against every injustice. Neoliberalism will end in Albania." Despite facing fierce backlash and co-optation, the Rights of Nature movement has achieved several pioneering victories and seen impressive global expansion. Since the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund passed the world's first modern Rights of Nature law in 2006, what began as a small spark has ignited an international movement, with hundreds of communities around the world now legally protecting nature's right to not only exist, but thrive. The movement's foundational wins have inspired a new generation of advocates, and its core principle that ecosystems are not mere property and should have enforceable rights is now being debated in courtrooms and legislatures worldwide, signaling a profound shift in our relationship with the natural world. This past month, CELDF released its inaugural State of Rights of Nature report, offering advocates a roadmap to protect the movement's integrity and build on its successes. Rather than retreating in the face of pushback, activists are providing an annual resource that empowers attorneys, organizers, and judges with the tools to enact impactful legislation. The report's honest acknowledgement of powerful opponents is framed not as despair, but as a rallying cry. The very fact that the Rights of Nature movement threatens entrenched interests proves its potential. By staying vigilant, learning from past wins, and refusing to compromise on core principles, the movement is positioning itself to grow stronger. In a move reflecting growing nationwide pushback, Harford County, Maryland has become the first county in the state to permanently ban data centers, with the county council voting unanimously to prohibit them in all zoning districts. The decision followed a packed public hearing where a crowd of residents, many wearing green, packed the chambers and dozens more watched on a live feed, with 46 speakers voicing their concerns. County Executive Bob Casserly championed the ban as a measure to protect the community from potential harms, citing the massive energy demands of hyperscale facilities, one of which could double the county's residential electricity demand, as well as noise and water usage. This action in Harford County is part of a much larger movement across the United States pushing back against the rapid proliferation of data centers. At the state level, lawmakers in 14 states have introduced legislation to ban or pause data center development. Over 100 local moratoriums and bans have been proposed at the county and municipal levels, and at least 69 local U.S. jurisdictions have implemented restrictions, moratoriums, or outright bans on data center construction. This surge in opposition has blocked or delayed tens of billions of dollars in investment and shows no signs of slowing down. Given the environmental implications of the generative AI rush, the ferocity and efficacy of local opposition is heartening. If you have good news from the current month, please send your stories to mexie@protonmail.com. As mentioned, we have a special offer for viewers from MeansTV, which is a worker-owned cooperative dedicated to supporting and producing anti-capitalist media. The streaming service hosts us, along with other rad creators like Second Thought and Luna Oi, full-length documentaries like Abby Martin's Gaza Fights for Freedom, and Means original content like Means Morning News, Seriously Wrong's Papa and Boy, and much more. We're happy to announce that we are now able to offer viewers a discount on joining MeansTV. If you sign up using our link and code, which is mexie, you'll get 20% off your first month, which comes to $7.99. Or you could go with the annual option and get 20% off the entire year. Signing up using our code not only directly contributes to the financial sustainability of the Means Cooperative Media Project, but is also a great way to support our channel. So if you have the means, consider taking us up on the discount. The link and code are in the description box below. Thank you to Javi for the Positive News Jams. Thank you to Cosmo for the Positive News background. Thank you to Catherine and me for scriptwriting, production, and hosting. And thank you to the Hazels for editing this video. If you'd like to support the show, please go to patreon.com/Positive Leftist News, or you can give us a one-time tip via PayPal. The link is in the description box below.